Have you ever booked an Airbnb and gotten that gut feeling that something was just off? Not the place itself, but more like the situation you found yourself in? I had one of those trips last year, and it's honestly hard to talk about. My name's Jake, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened that weekend in Ohio. It started out like any other trip. It was October, cool weather, leaves starting to change. I needed some time away from the city, so I found this cabin online. It looked perfect, secluded, lots of trees around, exactly what I needed to unwind. The photos showed a cozy interior, a big porch, even a little fire pit. I was sold. The reviews were all solid too. Everyone seemed to love how peaceful it was. But looking back now, maybe that's what should have bothered me in the first place. So I booked the place, pack a few things, and drive out there on a Friday afternoon. I figured I'd spend the weekend hiking, reading, and maybe catching up on sleep. It was about an hour and a half from Cleveland, right on the edge of this small town I'd never heard of. It didn't seem like a popular spot for tourists, which was fine by me. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was almost exactly like the pictures. Small but not run down, surrounded by trees and no neighbors in sight. I got that feeling of excitement, like when you're about to start a mini vacation. I grabbed my bag, found the lockbox, and let myself in. The host had left a note on the table welcoming me and reminding me to lock the doors at night because the area was remote. You know, standard stuff. The first night was uneventful. I cooked some pasta, had a beer, and spent most of the evening flipping through channels. At one point I noticed there wasn't much reception, which was kind of annoying, but I figured I'd get used to it. No big deal. I went to bed pretty early, excited to start my weekend. Saturday morning I woke up to birds chirping outside. I made myself some coffee and decided to explore the nearby hiking trail the host mentioned. It was about a 5-minute drive from the cabin. As I pulled into the small, empty lot, I couldn't help but notice how dead quiet everything was. No cars, no other hikers, just me. I walked for about an hour, enjoying the crisp air and the fall colors. It was peaceful at first, but then I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Off to the side of the trail, about 20 feet in, there was a tent. And not like a typical camping tent. This one was old, torn in places, and looked like it had been there for a while. Now, I'm not one to get easily spooked, but something about that tent gave me a weird feeling. I didn't go near it. I didn't want to intrude on someone's space if they were camping, but I didn't see anyone around either. Just silence. I brushed it off, kept walking, and eventually reached a spot where the trees cleared out, giving me a pretty great view of the valley below. I stayed there for a bit, trying to shake off the weird vibe from earlier, but I couldn't stop thinking about that tent. It wasn't like I was in a national park with designated campsites. Whoever was staying out there was doing it off-grid for sure. On my way back, I kept glancing around, half expecting to see someone stepping out of the woods. But I didn't. I reached the parking lot, got in my car, and drove back to the cabin. The whole time I kept checking my rearview mirror. I can't explain why, but I felt watched. Back at the cabin, I tried to relax, but my mind was racing. I even thought about leaving early, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. The tent probably belonged to some backpacker. People do that all the time, right? Later that night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, I heard a noise outside. It wasn't loud, just a light rustling, but enough to get my attention. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe some animal, but the more I listened, the more it started sounding like footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps on the porch. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen anyone all day, and the idea that someone might be out there, on my porch in the middle of nowhere, made my stomach drop. I stood up quietly and moved toward the front door. I was too scared to look out the window, but I felt like I had to see what was out there. So I flicked on the porch light and took a deep breath. Nothing. The porch was empty. I stared for a while, trying to convince myself it was just an animal passing by, maybe a raccoon. But as I was about to turn off the light, I noticed something. There were footprints. Fresh, muddy footprints on the porch, leading right up to the door and then disappearing. It was like they stopped right there, as if whoever made them had vanished. At that point, I was done. I grabbed my phone and texted the Airbnb host. It was something along the lines of, "Hey, I heard something outside. There were footprints on the porch. Is there anyone who might have been around?" I didn't expect an immediate reply. It was late. But to my surprise, she texted back right away. Her response was short. "I'm sorry, there shouldn't be anyone there. I can call the police if you want." That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. I started packing up my things, telling myself I was leaving first thing in the morning. I wasn't going to stay another night out there. I barely slept. I kept hearing things, branches snapping, faint footsteps, but every time I looked out, I saw nothing. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. At the crack of dawn, I grabbed my stuff and left. I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I just wanted to get out of there. On my way out, I decided to drive past the trailhead one more time. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to see if the tent was still there. But when I pulled into the lot, the tent was gone. Completely. No sign it had ever been there. I still don't know what happened that weekend. I've gone over it in my head 100 times trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just some local messing with me, or maybe it was a camper who packed up and left before dawn, but those footprints on the porch, they still haunt me. Now, every time I think about booking another Airbnb, I hesitate. Because no matter how many good reviews a place has, no matter how nice the pictures look, you never really know what's waiting for you when you get there. I'd been stressed out for months, just burning out at work, and when I came across this little cabin rental on Airbnb, it seemed like exactly what I needed. The listing had great reviews. It was a modern cabin, tucked away in the woods, maybe 20 minutes outside of some small town in Pennsylvania. Quiet, remote, peaceful, perfect, right? The host, Rebecca, had dozens of glowing reviews. Everyone said she was super friendly, quick to respond, and the place was always spotless. The pictures showed this really sleek, minimalist space, big windows, lots of light, and a huge porch overlooking nothing but trees. I couldn't wait. I booked it for the weekend, packed up my car, and hit the road right after work on Friday. The drive was a little over 3 hours, but it wasn't bad. Mostly highway until I got off at this small town exit, and the GPS took me through these narrow, winding roads that just got more isolated the further I went. I mean, there was nothing out there. The last gas station I saw was maybe half an hour before the cabin, so you can imagine how deep into the woods this place was. But when I finally got there, it looked exactly like the pictures. The cabin was small, modern, clean, a little too perfect maybe, but I was just happy to be there. The key was in a lockbox, and Rebecca had messaged me the code earlier in the day. I let myself in, set my bags down, and just took a deep breath. You ever feel like you don't realize how stressed you are until you're away from everything? That's how it felt. The place was really nice. It smelled faintly like cedar, probably from the wood furniture. I did a quick walkthrough, 2 small bedrooms, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a fully stocked kitchen. The whole back wall was glass, just looking out over the deck and into the forest. I could already picture myself sitting out there with a beer, enjoying the quiet. The first night was exactly what I'd hoped for. I made some pasta, poured myself a glass of wine, and spent a couple of hours reading this book I'd brought. I was in bed by 10, which was unheard of for me, and I slept great. No city noise, no traffic, just pure silence. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling like a new person. I had my coffee on the porch and just soaked in the sounds of nature. Birds chirping, a light breeze through the trees, it was perfect. But as I sat there, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was this weird stillness in the air. I shrugged it off, figured I just wasn't used to the quiet after living in the city for so long. Later in the day, I decided to explore the area a bit. There was a hiking trail about a half-mile from the cabin, according to Rebecca's directions, so I threw on my jacket and set out. The trail wasn't anything special, just a dirt path winding through the woods. But after about 20 minutes, I came across something that made me stop. There, just off the trail, was a pair of shoes. Not old abandoned shoes, they looked brand new, expensive, men's hiking boots. But here's the thing. They were just sitting there, side by side, like someone had taken them off and walked away. There was no sign of anyone around and no reason for them to be there. I took a quick look around, but the woods were silent, empty. It gave me a weird feeling, but I kept walking, trying not to think about it. About an hour later, I headed back to the cabin. But I couldn't shake the unease I felt. Something was wrong with that place. I hadn't seen or heard a single person since I arrived, which, okay, maybe it was normal given how remote the area was. But it was the silence that got to me. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was unnerving. When I got back to the cabin, I locked the door behind me. I don't know why I felt the need to, but I did. I made some lunch, tried to distract myself by watching a movie on my laptop, but the Wi-Fi was spotty. Of course. I tried my phone, but I barely had any service. One bar, maybe two, if I stood by the window. I shot Rebecca a quick text to ask if the Wi-Fi had been acting up, but it didn't send. Great. By the time evening rolled around, I was starting to feel more on edge. The sun was setting, and the shadows outside the big windows were stretching across the floor. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. I had come here to relax, to get away from everything, and that's exactly what I was doing. But something about the place felt wrong. I tried calling a friend, just to hear another voice, but the call wouldn't go through. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, nothing loud, just faint rustling sounds like something or someone was moving around the cabin. I got up at one point, peeked out the window, but it was pitch black out there. I couldn't see a thing, and the feeling in my gut told me not to go outside. Around 2 a.m., I heard something that made me sit straight up in bed. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps on the deck. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone, but still no service. I crept over to the window, moving as quietly as I could. I didn't want whoever, or whatever, was out there to hear me. I peeked through the blinds, but there was nothing. The porch was empty. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, just waiting, barely breathing, listening. But everything was silent again. I didn't sleep at all after that. I stayed in bed, clutching my phone, waiting for morning. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little better, but that sense of unease never left. I packed my things, planning to leave first thing. I wasn't about to spend another night in that cabin, but as I opened the door to load my bags into the car, I froze. There, on the porch, were muddy footprints, bare footprints. They led from the side of the cabin, across the deck, and stopped right at the door, my door. But there were no prints leading away. That was it. I grabbed my stuff, threw it in the car, and got the hell out of there. As I drove down the long, winding road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the distance watching me leave. But there was no one, just the empty road and the trees. When I got home, I finally had service again. I checked my messages, nothing from Rebecca. No updates on the Wi-Fi, no follow-up to see how my stay was. Then I checked my email. There was a notification from Airbnb. The listing had been removed. No explanation, no details, just gone. I don't know what was going on in that cabin, and I don't want to know. All I know is I'll never book an Airbnb again.